Welcome back to the Biblical Justice Resources podcast. As we've discussed before, a key marker of the presence of justice is human flourishing. One group for which a focus on flourishing has been increasing in our society is neurodiverse individuals. With growing understanding and awareness of ADHD, autism, dyslexia, Tourette's, and more, people are now recognizing more broadly the unique strengths of neurodiverse individuals and the challenges that come with their diagnoses. As more people are asking how to support neurodiverse individuals, and especially children, at church, school, home, and beyond, we take a look at understanding neurodiversity and what skills you can develop to help support people you know and love with our guest, Dr. Nikki Elliott. Dr. Nikki is a clinical professor and director of the Center for Embodied Equity and Neurodiversity at the University of San Diego. A leading voice in neurodiversity and trauma-informed education, she has trained thousands of teachers, school counselors, and helping professionals worldwide to better support children with learning differences, mental health diagnoses, trauma histories, and behavioral challenges. Dr. Nikki is the author of the forthcoming book, Heart-Centered Connections: 7 Essential Skills for Helping Neurodiverse and Marginalized Children Thrive, which is currently available for pre-order and comes out on July 21st. Personally, I appreciate the care Dr. Nikki shows to helping others recognize the humanity in both neurodiverse individuals and children, how the skills she teaches are applicable for interacting with kids and adults, and how she presents the science behind the brain activity and behaviors in such a way that those of us who aren't experts on the brain are able to understand. In this episode, you'll learn how helping neurodiverse children starts with knowing your own nervous system, why neurodiverse brains and your brain function the way they do, and why focusing on neurodiverse inclusion matters in the church. Now, if you will, join me for this conversation with Dr. Nikki Elliott. My name's Eric, and this is the Biblical Justice Resources podcast. Our conversation will begin right after this. The Biblical Justice Resources podcast is supported by listeners like you at patreon.com/biblicaljusticeresources. If you're interested in supporting the podcast and helping to resource individuals and the church for the pursuit of biblical justice, please consider giving today at patreon.com/biblicaljusticeresources. Again, visit patreon.com/biblicaljusticeresources to help support the podcast. Now on with the show. Dr. Nikki, thank you for joining me here today.
Thank you, Eric. It's a pleasure. I appreciate the invitation.
I've been looking forward to this. As I just told you, my wife got to see you speak at the ELCA youth conference within the last few months. And so I've been looking forward to being able to talk to you about some of the concepts that she got to hear about. And I think she's looking forward also to taking part in whatever sort of a cohort or something you have coming up here pretty soon.
Yes, we at the University of San Diego offer a certificate training for child-facing professionals and caregivers in alignment with the concepts of my upcoming book. So I'd be happy to have her in the program. We really want to spread the word.
Yeah. And so I would like to just start with neurodivergence, neurodiversity. You talk a little bit in your book about some of that terminology, but I think just from my background growing up, like I was introduced to ADHD and ADD like in later elementary school as I think like early 2000s. And those two things now are not different anymore. They're the same thing. I think similarly, when I was in school, Asperger's and autism were two different things. And now those are not two different things anymore. So there's been a growing understanding emergence of what neurodiversity is and what that all entails. Can you maybe just help us out understanding where we are now, what is included in neurodiversity, anything there as kind of a starting point?
Excellent. Sure. It's a good grounding place because people mean so many different things. So the term neurodiversity was born in the autism movement. And the original intention of that term neurodiversity was to suggest that individuals with diagnoses such as autism spectrum disorder or ADHD, dyslexia, sensory processing disorders, as well as individuals who have PTSD or high trauma scores that may impact brain or nervous system function in similar ways and produce similar symptoms of ADHD or sensory sensitivities, that those individuals are not just the sum of their challenges or what society may perceive to be deficits around those diagnoses, but that there is an innate diversity of brain function and capacity that presents with a unique set of both challenges, which absolutely need attention and care and support, but also a set of strengths and innate dispositions that lean them to significant potential that is often overlooked when we are constantly holding a lens that is deficit-minded around neurodiverse diagnoses. So another thing you will hear sometimes distinctions in the conversation and terminology. So many times you will hear people say a neurodivergent. So I have a neurodivergent son who has a diagnosis of intellectual disability. In our work, many in the neurodiversity movement, you will hear me today refer to neurodiverse individuals rather than neurodivergent. And the reason for that is this. When we call a person neurodivergent, we're suggesting that there is some center or some norm that they have diverged from, which then for many people in our approaches of education, of interventions and care, suggests that our effort is to get that divergent person to come back to the center of what we perceive as the norm. And so when we refer to an individual instead as neurodiverse, in alignment with the ideology of neurodiversity, we're suggesting we're accepting the unique difference and diversity among those brains, nervous systems, and the needs that they present, with an attempt to support environments and relationships to meet their needs, rather than continuing to put the burden of expectation on that individual to come back to our idea of performing normal. So again, you will hear differences in how the terminology is used, and we have to really unpack what our hearts are oriented around when we consider individuals with these diagnoses.
Yeah. We are already bumping into me feeling like I don't have the language to ask questions. I feel like
please, you know what? I want to be careful, Eric. I'm sharing with you how, 30 years of professional evolution, as well as my lived experience as a mother with more than one child who would fall under this neurodiversity banner. In no way do I intend to word police the conversation or to feel like we can't move forward if we're referring to the same concept in a different way. I feel your heart of even inviting this conversation. So please don't get hung up on that. And I like to name it so that we can broaden future perspectives, but I would love to have a conversation in a way that's comfortable for you.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And certainly with the vocabulary and terminology and things like that. Mm-hmm. I also mean just like conceptually trying to figure out, it's like trying to connect the dots of, I understand like where we are. I kind of have an idea of where I want to direct a question, mm-hmm. but actually getting there, I think, is going to be a journey. So we'll see how that goes today.
I'm here for it. Let's go.
But when you talk about with the term neurodivergence in particular, having sort of forming this, like there is a center that we need to bring people back to versus allowing people to function where they are, thrive where they are, flourish where they are, and I guess sort of create. And to me, it almost comes into like thinking about something like the Strengths Finder test, which mm-hmm. when it was initially developed and introduced, focused pretty much exclusively on strengths. Now they give you like all your entire profile and all 34 mm-hmm. strengths. But the idea was that it is not better, but like maybe more helpful. Like there is more that can come out of developing your strengths versus trying to up your weaknesses in mm-hmm. the sense of that. I was curious about that with the neurodiversity, because there's definitely some level of, it seems like the society is set up in the way that it is set up. And in some way, everyone needs to function inside of that while we are trying to broaden our understanding of what society can do and what people can do. Mm-hmm. And it seems like while we are trying to, everyone involved in this conversation, trying to upgrade our strengths, focus on, for a neurodiverse child, for example, there are things that they may excel at that kind of fall outside of the norm of a school setting. At the same time, there are, I don't know if there are standards or regulations or something inside of that where you need to be able to interact with people who are diverse, who are different from you, whatever that. All of that said, like, what is the focus on developing strengths for a student or for a child for where they are as a potentially neurodiverse child versus like trying to help them in places where they're not necessarily immediately going to excel, and trying to develop those different things? What is this kind of focus on strength and helping do that versus focus on challenges and helping to develop those things?
Thank you. And that's a very important question, because we're asking for a holistic view of an individual, which means being able to balance their unique set and profile of challenges, strengths, and needs for advocacy. And so when you look at our heart-centered connections model, all of the professional development that I provide, as well as the direct life path empowerment work that we provide for neurodiverse scholars, we do not ever want to gaslight an individual into saying the things that they struggle with around a diagnosis of autism or ADHD are not real. Let's just focus on your strengths. Let's just focus on your genius, because there are aspects of these diagnoses that are very challenging to an individual's experience of daily life, their ability to feel comfortable in their own body, their ability to access physical spaces and environments due to extreme sensory sensitivities, or the amount of real social rejection and miscues that happen when we have a double empathy problem between neurodiverse and neurotypical communication styles. But our point is that we need to identify those unique areas, right? Because if you've met one autistic person, you've met one. So as an educator, as a caregiver, as a parent, we can't just look at a laundry list of symptoms that typically accompany a diagnosis and assume that all of those apply to the individual that's in front of us needing care. So we need to map their unique presentation, where it presents challenges, but also where there are unique strengths. And what I do in my work, whether as a parent of neurodiverse children or as an educator of teachers, is I ask, how can we hold both? So for example, I have a daughter with profound dyslexia and vision processing disorder, which makes it very difficult for her to read. Her eyes are tracking two different lines at the same time. And sometimes by her description, it looks like the words are raining down the page kind of diagonally as she's trying to read. Those are real challenges in the presentation that's complicating a regular diagnosis of dyslexia. So yes, we need vision therapy. We need Orton Gillingham and the other supports that help her get to grade level with reading. But if that's all we focused on, then it would just be a constant deficit model. And we run the risk of delaying. You'll be good enough when you can read at the level of your peers. I'll love you better when you'll make me proud as a parent when you, right? So we want to really manage the strong mental health. It's a strong chance that we run anxiety and depression and mental health diagnoses along with the challenges, depending on how we approach it. So in her case, I'm looking, what are her unique strengths? Where does she thrive in spite of this diagnosis? She loves to entertain. She loves to cook. She has amazing visual spatial. She's great with interior design, storyboarding. So as I put that together, she could have an amazing career in high-end event planning, catering, right? So we just sent her to a culinary camp at San Francisco State University. Her team won the whole cooking competition at the end, right? So we're building up the areas where she's strong. She's already been paid to design her first birthday party for a family member. So she's bringing together all of her event planning, her social skills, her culinary skills, her decorating skills, and seeing where that has value to be exalted, to be praised, to win awards. So she's getting opportunity to be mentored by a local florist, right? So we're spending as much time supporting where her challenges present real pain for her, while simultaneously providing mentorship opportunities where she can shine, thrive, and see where she's gifted exactly in the midst of a diagnosis that would otherwise only focus on where she's not at grade level. And that's what we're asking for. And then what are the accommodations that she needs? Text to speech, audiobooks, right? Kurzweil 3000. How do we help the environment meet her where she is rather than only expecting her to be able to be supported in a mainstream environment if she can perform the system's idea of normal? And to me, that is the holistic lens I'm trying to help every educator and every parent see for each individual unique presentation of neurodiversity.
Yeah. It kind of naturally wants to lead me to questions about how to actually like implement that immediately and focus on students and children and things like that. But I think what comes up a lot in your book, like both with, so there are 7 principles inside of this book. The first principle, I think, focuses on the self, like the teacher, the self of the teacher, but also inside of each of the other ones, it like starts off with the self of the teacher, focusing on where, and in this case for the audience, this would be teachers, whoever is working with a child and not necessarily just inside of a classroom setting. So maybe we can start there, and before we move on to focusing on each individual student and their situation. What does it look like? What is the importance of focusing on the self, whether it be parent, teacher, youth pastor, whatever sort of individual is focusing or working with these different students?
Thank you. So I would, if I could back up a little bit. So the full foundation of Heart-Centered Connections, which is the title of the book, we teach 7 essential skills for helping neurodiverse and marginalized children thrive. Usually, again, people are looking at what behavior strategy can I use? What tip, what trick to fix the child again? And so what we understand that in this approach, we're taking an understanding of applied educational neuroscience. We're taking the approach of mind, body, nervous system awareness, and we're taking the approach of polyvagal theory. So these kind of insights are framing the way that we look at neurodiversity. So if we look at it cognitively, I give you an instruction, you do what I say, right? I have the cognitive executive functioning skills to comply. This applied educational neuroscience approach gives us an understanding that learning really happens from the bottom up. And unless the body and the nervous system is oriented to a state of felt safety and connection, we are less likely to be able to activate and access the hippocampus for memory, the frontal lobe for executive functioning. So the research also shows that neurodiverse individuals have something that the literature refers to as lower vagal tone. And so to boil that down really easily for our conversation, what that means is research shows that the nervous systems of neurodiverse people have a harder time settling to a sense of felt safety, have stronger sensory sensitivities that can affect nervous system and physical behavioral regulation, and are easier to trigger and harder to settle, have a harder time with managing change and uncertainty and transitions. And that one of the major things that supports increasing vagal tone, which is the brakes of your nervous system that say, I can calm down, I can settle, is their ability to co-regulate and borrow the settled nervous system of the adult who's in charge. So if you can see from that understanding, that is why the first pillar of Heart-Centered Connections is self-awareness of the adult's own nervous system. So most adults are not aware of how often their limited nervous system capacity actually triggers the children's unwanted behaviors that you're concerned about, whereas the source is really in the antecedent is us so many times. And so the research shows that up to about 70% of children's strong or challenging behaviors can be traced back to either the relational space with the adult who's in charge, something that is or is not happening, or the physical environment and the sensory stressors that are assaulting the child or the individual's nervous system. Another thing I see in my work, Eric, as I'm training teachers and foster parents, there is a lot of undiagnosed and untreated neurodiversity in the adults who are providing the care. Similarly, there is a lot of unmitigated, unprocessed trauma in the nervous systems and neurology of many of the adults who are providing care. So then we have adults who get triggered very easily when children are making repetitive sounds or, just moving around or needing a lot of, movement. The adults are overly restricting the children's behavior or overreacting in many cases to the children's behavior because their own nervous systems can't handle the unpredictability, the uncertainty, the movement. And so when we focus on the adult, really unpacking, how has my nervous system been conditioned to respond to stress? What is my capacity to deal with unexpected loud sounds, right? Or stimming that's happening with the child? We find that you can take the same child with the same behavior, you put them in one teacher's classroom, that child is escalated, they're getting kicked out of class, not even able to show you what they're capable of. You take that same child, the same nervous system, same behavior, you move him or her into another teacher's class who has a more settled nervous system, a wider bandwidth of capacity to handle behaviors, dysregulation, stress, uncertainty, movement around the space. You see a completely different version of that child. And so that research that I've seen and observed and conducted over 30 years now of my career, we've seen a 50% reduction in failed foster home placements when the foster parents who receive training through this Heart-Centered Connections program understand the dynamic between themselves and the foster child, that the child in foster care that they've brought into their home through this nervous system perspective. So for this reason, the nervous system capacity of the adult has to be understood as the foundation for everything else that is to follow.
Yeah, that's so good. It makes me think of a couple different things. One, I think you touch on in your work is the statements that can be made, like, well, this is the way we did it and I turned out fine, like as an adult individual. Makes me think of, did you always turn out fine, or are there things that you need to learn about yourself maybe that you don't know about? Or maybe you turned out fine, but maybe your child's teacher has more under the surface than you or they realize, and maybe it would be helpful for the adults to learn about this as well as the children.
Yeah.
In
it's
addition,
so important.
Go ahead.
It really, I just wanted to say that question is so important. And I think it's a question that every adult who cares for children needs to grow into an awareness and a comfort to ask themselves. But it's not a one-time question. It's over and over and over again, because our nervous system state and conditioning is below our level of conscious awareness. So this work is asking us to make the unconscious conscious and to make the implicit explicit. And when we take that time to excavate in that way, it brings up powerful revelations for adults. And we see a lot of remorse sometimes in the trainings when the realization washes over people, like, wow, what did I do to kids before I understood this? And thinking it is just their fault, or that's just the way it is because that's the way it always was.
Yeah. I even had that a little bit. I was a camp counselor when I was in college. I was like, how would this have helped me 15 years ago, however long it's been since then, to know some of these things at that point in time?
That is the question that comes up in every single training. And that's why even just a few weeks ago, we now provide the Heart-Centered Connections training for camp counselors. These are mostly undergrad college students, right? They have had no training. If they've had any time babysitting little brothers and sisters or cousins, which is rare, that young adults come with any experience being around children for extended periods of time anymore. And so this awareness is critical for all of us, because otherwise we're not coming to the table with even foundational awareness of how to be with young people, and then let alone the professional knowledge that this work provides.
Yeah. In addition to all those things, I also, like, in the content that I end up seeing around some topics related to neurodiversity, the number of parents who end up finding a diagnosis for themselves when they find a diagnosis for their child seems to be noteworthy as well. I think to some of the things you talked about, of the people who take the training finding out about their own neurodiversities or other trauma underneath that. So I think that's another thing to keep in mind for people who are coming to this for the first time.
Yeah, we see that often in our trainings, and as well as reports from school psychologists who actually do the testing to offer the diagnoses, that they see that a lot. And again, it's important to remember too that even today, the research is just coming out in the last few years to understand that many women and girls are significantly underdiagnosed for ADHD and autism. And so now that awareness of that bias in the testing has been occurring, then you're getting an explosion of ADHD and autism late stage diagnoses for women.
Yeah. I'm curious, you talk some about, again, I'm not going to remember the language specifically, but I think you use the term, maybe I won't even try to remember the term. It's not working off the top of my head right now. But there seems to be a connection, at least in action or the way things manifest, with neurodiverse diagnosed individuals and kids with trauma.
Mm-hmm.
What is the connection? It doesn't seem like there is a connection necessarily between the diagnoses themselves, but there is a similarity between the action. First, am I understanding that correctly? And second, what does the combination of that look like?
Yes. So there is a study that was conducted in the late 90s by the CDC and Kaiser Permanente called the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study. So I encourage any of your listeners who are curious about this to look into that. And from that work, there is a pediatrician out of San Francisco area, Dr. Nadine Burke-Harris, who has studied and spoken extensively about the impact of trauma on children's learning as well as long-term health. And so there's a big body of research and understanding that for some people who have been exposed to chronic trauma, when the body is living in fight or flight, there is a consistent activation of the amygdala. And so when we have that amygdala activation, danger, 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 the brain cannot simultaneously prioritize study and survival. So it will every time kick the body into survival mode. So you get the boost of cortisol, adrenaline, a lot of the physical symptomologies around physiology of stress. So the rapid heart rate, the dilated pupils, the disruption of digestion. So which is where we see many of our neurodiverse students and trauma impacted students having higher rates of stomach complaints and digestive issues and things like that. So when a body is in survival mode, it's less capable of activating that vagal brake that we just talked about, that vagal tone. So the vagus nerve, the parasympathetic part of the nervous system that says, you're safe now. You can turn off all that vigilance and slow down. It's when the vagus nerve and that vagal brake is activated that the brain says, oh, I can return my resources to resting, to digesting this food, to healing, bonding, having pro-social connections, and most importantly in this conversation, activating the hippocampus, the frontal lobe, the executive functions. And so in cases where, again, the brain is primed to have more amygdala danger activation, that's less access to the hippocampus, which is our memory maker and our making associations to prior knowledge, as well as the frontal lobe, which is connected to our executive functions for time management, impulse control, planning, organization, problem solving. So all of those skills, that pattern is lining up with ADHD symptomology. So that's where you will see people referring to, in some individuals, chronic or significant exposure to trauma can produce changes to the nervous system and brain that can produce symptomology that can reflect the symptoms of ADHD, similar to ADHD, and sensory sensitivities as well.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious, as you're talking about this, that there is a whole lot of science behind this. And I think there are a whole lot of people who will either be intimidated by the science or not be able to follow. I'm feeling that myself. I've heard different things about what different parts of the brain do different things for a number of years now. And I couldn't tell you, if you gave me a test tomorrow, what each of those things are.
Right.
How much of the science is necessary to know behind this for your, I guess, lay person, teacher, individual? And how much of it is just understanding that there are things that the brain cannot do when there are certain things going on?
Right. So in our approach, in the way that I wrote Heart-Centered Connections, was intentional to make sure that any caregiver or educator or child-facing professional at any level could connect with the work, understand the terminology, and understand how to apply it. So it is able to connect with people with a high school students, even not even high school diploma. We just taught this work to high school students last week and they got it, all the way to students that study with me earning master's degrees or PhDs. And I would say if we were to boil it down to just a couple things, we teach the autonomic nervous system in terms of understanding that the sympathetic nervous system gets activated in fight or flight. Most people remember that from, basic science. And then the parasympathetic or the vagus nerve is the brakes of the nervous system that says, I can calm down. We orient around the amygdala. Just think of the amygdala as the watchdog or the danger detector. And that is the most important thing that I need the average lay person to understand, is that for neurodiverse people, many of these diagnoses, they have a more active amygdala, which is more actively experiencing signals of threat, whether threats around physical safety, but really a lot of psychological safety, as well as sensory safety. So for some people, the fluorescent lights that are in many of our classrooms or environments can be stressing their nervous system in a way that creates a danger signal for them that could feel like they're being chased by a tiger. And so when we see reactivity that doesn't seem to fit the situation, we don't get it. Like, why are you melting down over this? Or why is this big thing? It doesn't fit the occasion or the situation that I'm witnessing. But we're not understanding that their nervous systems are registering threat. Sometimes it's from food that we're eating, right? So there's more research now coming out about how certain foods create reactivity and inflammation in the body in ways that set off a danger alert from the food. So we're learning so much about how do we create this state of felt safety. That's why you hear so much about co-regulation, so much about connection, both from the physical environment as well as from the relational environment, because we want to quiet that amygdala danger detector, because only when that amygdala is registered a sense of safety and it can quiet, can now the body prioritize the higher thinking. So then the hippocampus is that memory maker. And then the frontal lobe is, again, those executive functions. So we call it the executive director. So now when I'm in that state of safety, my amygdala is quiet, my survival responses are quieted. Now I have reserve and accessibility to learning, to pro-social behavior, to memory. And so that we have to get those couple of things locked in, and we do it in many different ways. We build the brain out of clay. We build models of the nervous system with string, because what I have found over and over, Eric, is when I can get caregivers and educators to understand, you have to be able to distinguish intentional behavior, which is what many people think they're witnessing when they're observing a neurodiverse child's upsetting behavior. You have to be able to distinguish, am I witnessing intentional willful behavior? Or am I witnessing behaviors that are a symptom and a manifestation of a diagnosis that point to a different need for care and an adjustment in the relational space or in the physical environment? The only way I get teachers and adults to make that accurate flip in their assessment is by making sure they understand these foundational principles of the brain. So then they can say, it's not their fault. Because as long as an adult continues to believe that the way a child is behaving is within their total power and it's their fault to not do it a different way or their preferred way, they lack the compassion that's needed to make the heart-centered connection that's going to make the co-regulation and to drive the subsequent intervention in the way that's going to be most productive.
Yeah, and I think that's important to touch on, because it seems to me like there are a variety of areas where humans are best at addressing the last step in the process, like the action that happened, and not as good at going further back down the chain to say, where is this coming from? Why did this happen? Rather than, here is the action that happened that this person needs to take responsibility for and needs to be punished or handled or dealt with, whatever. Certainly, there needs to be some level of holding a person accountable for the action that is taken. But I think to some of what you're saying, if we either don't know where that came from or someone hasn't learned a different way to either deal with what they're dealing with, handle it, or just understand what are different ways to have that energy come out, like then we're going to continue dealing with things. And I think to some of what you say, it's going to get further and further, worse and worse, more stressful and more stressful for everyone involved in a situation.
Right. And it really is, it really comes down to tracing antecedents, but not just looking at the thing that antecedent, the thing that happened before the behavior, right? So that's a big part of our work. But we're learning to trace and observe nervous system states and shifts in nervous system states. And that, I think, is the biggest contribution of my work in heart-centered connections, because I'm training adults to not just trace the child's nervous system state of how they shift when they've moved out of a state of safety, which we call the green zone, to when they've moved into a mobilized state, which is the red zone of fight or flight, or if they're in the purple zone of appeasement, where they look like they're going along, but they really are in a survival state, or in a complete state of shutdown, where they've just given up and are quiet quitting, right? So we have a model for helping adults. I'm going to say, what nervous system state were they in? And what are the things that help them get back to that green zone of safety and connection? But I'm not just asking them, where was the child's nervous system? I'm saying, where was your nervous system? Were you functioning from that green zone of settled a nervous system state of connection and co-regulation? Or were you red and they were red? Well, there can be no co-regulation if you're both in a mobilized state. So that awareness creates the mindfulness pause that puts space between our triggers and our automatic, unconscious, unexamined responses. Because that's where most parenting and most work with neurodiverse children is coming from. It's coming from automatic, unexamined responses to triggers. And so our work is unpacking that whole line. Where does that sensation live in my body when I'm having to repeat something for my son with intellectual disability for the 30th time? Yep. Am I getting a clench in my jaw? Am I getting a knot in my stomach? Am I getting a fire running up my spine, right? So we train how to analyze the physical somatic sensations in the body that signal to me that I'm about to move out of that green zone of connection into a mobilized state where I might start raising my voice, or I might leave the room or ask him to leave the room, right? So, and then what are the practices that we can employ and put in place that'll help me settle? So a shift in my jaw, a pause long enough to untangle the knot in my psoas muscle in my gut, right? A deep breath to breathe that fire up my spine, back down and out through my feet. A long enough pause for us as the adult to be responsible for the next thing we do or say when the neurodiverse individual in front of us that we're responsible for is pushing our buttons. That's the part we don't have enough conversation about and enough skill building to unpack that from inside the body, because what we understand about the nervous system, we can think all the great things we should do or say, but in the moment when we're triggered and our nervous system is stressed, those great ideas are not available to us unless we've practiced how to move that energy with mindfulness in the moment.
Yeah. As you're talking, I'm just like, this will be so helpful for people to know and to work through, because it feels like it will end up being better it feels like a lot of this ends up not being better just for neurodiverse students. Like, there is a way where these practices that get implemented are better for everyone in whatever scenario, classroom, family, church, etc.
Yeah.
That it ends up being able to help you better engage with what is happening with whatever person you're interacting with.
It does. And I've had so many people take our training at the University of San Diego, and repeatedly they will say, my spouse is noticing the difference in me. You know, my own children at home. I've got so many adults that I train in this work, and they are in a sandwich generation, right? They're raising neurodiverse children at home. They're working a full-time job, and they are providing care for aging parents. And so that nervous system capacity, that same capacity that you need to be better in your support, your patient support of a child with a disability, is the same patience that and nervous system awareness that you need to be more patient with your aging parent with Alzheimer's or any other chronic condition that you're providing care for with heart.
Yeah. We've already talked a little bit about the importance of safety in terms of being able to function well, function better for everyone who we've already talked about. I think from spaces that I've been connected to in my past, people might hear safety and think safe spaces and have some level of suspicion for a safe space. And it sounds like you have a distinction between like there is a similarity but not an exact overlap of safety and safe spaces. Can you kind of talk about what the similarities and differences are and what we're looking for in when we're talking about safety versus a safe space?
A sense of felt safety.
Sense of felt safety, yes.
Yes. So, we see it everywhere, the stickers on the windows or at the doors of counselors' offices or classrooms. This is a safe space. You are safe here. And one extreme of that is something that I have an issue with, and I will feel free to speak on that, where people say, you can't say anything that upsets me. If this is a safe space, and you can't bring up that conversation because that activates my nervous system, and therefore this isn't a safe space. So anything that makes me upset or makes me feel nervous or makes me feel uncomfortable makes this not a safe space, and therefore we can't talk about these issues, right? But the thing is, life is hard. And your show is called not racial justice, but biblical justice. So anytime you want to have conversations, anything about justice, those are hard conversations that by very nature can be activating, that can make our heart race or to create strong emotions where someone would cry. And so what we talk about is this idea of felt safety, is that even within the hard things that we need to do, there is a foundational presence of care and respect and regard for the individual that I can feel activated. I can feel upset if you and I were to be having a strong conversation about our current politics and the racial undertones of that I have enough nervous system capacity to feel respected and grounded, that even when I feel shaken, I have an anchor in my nervous system and in the presence of our relationship that allows me to stay in the conversation rather than to feel like I need to get out of here because my sense of self or identity is in danger. So again, we need this, what we call this vagus nerve activation, and this ability to get back to this sense of, I don't know, how do I explain it? I'm trying to explain it in an easy way without going too far in the scientific realm. So I'll give it a different way. We have a lot of children that are neurodiverse in schools, and there are these individual teachers where they say, the kids come to my classroom, I need my lunch break, I'm exhausted. And it has been several times where they say, the kids seem to say the same thing. Mr. Jones, Miss Jones, you don't have to talk to me. I don't really even need you. But when I feel disrespected in this place and they keep telling me I can't do this and I can't do that, or people talk to me like I'm not capable or like I don't understand. But when I'm around you and when I come into your classroom, I just feel like I don't have to be on guard. I don't have to protect myself. I can just be. And that is the felt sense of the safe space. It's when you can unball your shoulders, when you can unknot your stomach, when you can have that long exhale that activates the parasympathetic part of your nervous system. We need spaces where we are not living in constant vigilance, that then creates the conditions where we can push further to do the hard things. Does that make sense?
Yeah, from personal lived experience, I think that makes sense.
So what I always tell my teachers is like that feeling is the operationalizing of felt safety from the body's perspective. And then from there, we can stretch to learn new things, open our hearts to take in new ideas, changes of perspective. Even if we're having hard conversations or being pushed to do things that are beyond our present capacity, that connection of someone by my side that says, yeah, that's a hard thing, but we can do that hard thing together. And I'm going to be by your side to watch you push to that next level. That's the felt safety. It's not about bubble wrapping your world to where nothing harmful or hurtful or stressful is going to impact you.
Yeah.
But that when I'm in a space where I'm regarded for my humanity, with co-regulation, that's the felt safety that I need to now push and stress my nervous system to the next new level of excellence and possibility.
Yeah. Just to make sure we get a couple more things in here on time, I'm going to focus on just a few more things that a little bit have come up. One of them is the idea that, say you're a teacher in a classroom, or even just for me when I was a camp counselor, I had 8 boys in my cabin, specifically thinking of one week in particular, 8 fifth grade boys in my cabin for a week. And it seems like that amount of time to try and get to know each of them individually and try to know how to interact with them individually and what makes them tick and so on and so forth seems like an impossible task for me personally. Maybe a seasoned teacher could feel like I understand how to interact with each person individually to get to know them a little better throughout the course of a year. But take that 8 and turn it into 15, 25, 30 kids. What is it? How do you try to find that time to make sure that you in some way are connecting individually with a student, a child, to get to better know where they're at and how to support them?
Mm-hmm. So one exciting feature of the heart-centered connections model is that we understand that one teacher, one camp counselor can't know all of the needs of 8 campers or 25 students, but we can empower 8 campers or 25 students to understand themselves and to make their nervous system needs and their unique needs known, and then empower them in a way that supports them in getting those needs met within the space. So if I may give an example of that, for the camp that I just trained last week, we can only do one part of the heart-centered connections model. They didn't have time to do the full training. So what was most important was for them to understand the sensory profile. So we had all of the camp leaders complete the sensory profile for themselves, because this is always important that the adults know their own sensory stressors and soothers. And then on the first day of camp or before the camp, they have the children along with their families complete the sensory profile for themselves. So, for example, my son has extraordinary auditory sensory sensitivity on the basis of his diagnosis. So if there's loud sounds or an ambulance or a shrieking bell, you're going to need to support him because you may see dysregulated behavior depending on how long and how excruciating that loud sound is for him. That awareness makes all the difference, Eric, in how you would support him when you hear that sound versus trying to manage the behaviors that you might see on the back end of that would make you say, oh, this kid's not a fit for camp. So just by having that sensory awareness, and then the children are taught tools. So breathwork practices, mind-body practices. We have flexible seating. They're able to ask, can we please turn off the fluorescent lights? Or can I please go sit on the side of the room where we have fluorescent lights on one side, but the lights are turned off on the other side? It is amazing to see students be able to begin to negotiate how to function in the space and name what their needs are. So this is where we see significant reductions in strong behaviors, even in short interactions like a camp period versus a whole year of a classroom environment building together. And then we also have nervous system meters where the students are taught to identify for their teacher where their nervous system is on a scale of 0, which is kind of very lethargic and frozen and shut down in fear, all the way up to 10, which is full on mobilized in fight or flight, like I'm running out of the building with my hair on fire. So they're able to just come in and put their picture or their face on that meter, and the teacher can easily scan and see where students are coming in or how their needs are moving throughout the day. And then they're taught mind-body practices and different types of agency decisions that a student can make that allow them, again, to get a need met before the behavior rises to a point where it is feeling out of control. And here we're seeing, again, 40 to 50% reductions in the need for expelling, sending children to the office, or having to engage in strong discipline because we're getting ahead and in front of the behaviors before they occur, and empowering the students to name it without any shame.
Yeah. And this is where, with your book, the way you have it set up, I think it's really a good resource to be able to come back to and say, I don't remember exactly how this thing works, but I can go back to this chapter or to this section in the chapter and say, refresh myself on what are the things that would maybe be helpful in different scenarios as they come up.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm very proud of this work. And it's resting on, again, decades of trial and error and evidence in not just in classrooms, but also in camps, in tutoring programs. And I mean, to your point of your podcast of biblical justice, I'm really proud that now communities of faith are starting to understand that when we can't keep saying, sorry, I was never trained to deal, quote unquote, deal with behaviors like this, and then sending children away from Sunday school. sending a children away from Bible camp. I was raised Catholic, so I'm very much aware of historically the Catholic Church has removed children with learning disabilities from parochial school and sent them back to the public school. Sorry, we can't quote unquote deal. But what's so important to remember is that when we don't take the time to learn these skills so that we can effectively include children in their faith formation, you're not just sending that child away from that camp experience or from that Sunday school experience. They're missing the opportunity for faith formation to understand the love of God, right? And then it doesn't just have an effect for the child that you sent away. That entire family is now missing an opportunity for faith formation, because now the parent who doesn't have a Bible camp or, Sunday school, youth ministry, family ministry, they're not coming to church. And so each time we say that, we forget that an entire family is moving away and becoming invisible in society. And we have to question whether the love of Christ is really being reflected in that. And so again, that's why this book, Heart-Centered Connections, is really, I really just need to implore everyone who touches the life of children or families to understand how often we use that as an out and what our true commitments are to have a truly just and inclusive society for all, but especially as it relates to faith formation.
Yeah. I think my last question, which as always deserves more time than we're going to have here for it, is on that sense of trial and error and what happens when we make a mistake and need to repair. Because I can imagine someone saying, great, I got it, I'm going to take this, run into it, not going to have any problems with it, and then suddenly have something happen. Or having someone on a different end being like, I know I'm going to mess something up. What is the point of even trying when that happens? What does it look like when someone does fall into something where there is a need for repair? You as the teacher or parent or whoever adult in the room makes a mistake, causes a rift of some sort. What does the repair process look like here?
Yes. So that's actually the seventh and final pillar of Heart-Centered Connections. It's literally, the title is Heart-Centered Repair. And the reason that that's so important to me is because I've read some research that shows neurodiverse children experience 3 times the amount of negative criticism and feedback as their neurotypical peer. And then I've read something else that said 20 times. So let's just say it's somewhere, but a significant increased amount. And so many times it's because we might already be operating out of assumptions. We might be assuming malintent. We might be assuming incompetence, right? And so as soon as we observe something in the child, we're jumping to, you meant to do that, but then we have to backtrack from it. And many of us as adults, especially for myself, being raised, half Catholic and half evangelical. So got a little bit, but just that strong kind of adult, what the adult says goes. And there wasn't this culture of apologizing to children, even when the adult knew that they had done something wrong. Or this idea, in my case, of being punished by adults for speaking the truth when what I was saying was accurate, but I wasn't supposed to say it, right? And we need to know that for neurodiverse children, speaking the truth and unfiltered truth is part of their profile. It's not that they're just trying to make our lives miserable or to be disrespectful or defiant. They're speaking the truth, that unfiltered, that is a part of their diagnosis profile. So the very first thing we have to do in this case is really search our hearts around what it means to us to model for children continuous improvement. And that is a personal, spiritual thing that I think each adult has to do, of what does it mean to me to admit to a child that I've done something wrong, I made a decision that was wrong, a thing that I tried didn't work, to name it out loud for the child. So the research shows children can be very resilient when bouncing back from adults' mistakes. But if we own it verbally, openly, out loud, if we make a formal apology to the child, and then we invite their opinion on what could be done better or different, and then we allow them to witness us engage in the new behavior, implement the new system, I am very comfortable. I've become very comfortable saying, I'm so sorry, that did not work. I tried. What do you think would be a better way to teach you that or help you understand that? Okay, I'm going to do that next time. And then they see the full circle of me acknowledging that I did something that didn't work or was hurtful in what I said, making the formal, I apologize for what I did, and I know that that hurt you. What do you think we could do differently or that could make it better? And then they observe me do the new thing. That completed cycle of repair shows agency for the child, it shows respect for the child, and we are modeling the growth that we are asking of them.
Yeah.
And the behaviors drop so significantly when they say, oh, you messed up and you did better. So now when you ask me to do better, when I mess up, I see I could do that too. And it's not damaging our relationship. It's only making it stronger.
Yeah. It's so good. It's the stuff we've talked about here in the past, just thinking about the image of God, I think, is the Christian language, or seeing the humanity in other people. Seeing
Absolutely.
humanity in another person allows you to see the humanity in yourself, or
in a child, right?
Yeah, and seeing children as humans as well.
We talk about every other level of justice, but we really have to get all the way down to ageism toward children, right?
Yeah.
We talk about gender, ethnicity, religion, socioeconomics, but we still believe we have dominion and power over children's voices. To silence them, to not consider them, or to not see them as someone that God has imparted with knowledge and wisdom that's meant to grow us as much as we are meant to help grow and develop them.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a good place for us to end here today. So thank you, Dr. Nikki, again for joining me. I appreciated that conversation.
It's been wonderful, Eric. Thank you so much for the invitation.
Hey, it's Eric. Thanks for watching the Biblical Justice Resources podcast here on YouTube. If you found this episode helpful, insightful, or informative, check out another one of our videos, subscribe for more, or share this with a friend. If you're looking for more resources on how to pursue biblical justice, head over to our website at biblicaljusticeresources.com or check out the show notes below for more links.